This is another edition of Red Hoop Talk. It is I, Jennifer Robin, and I am here with the brains of our family, Brian Wallace. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Hogamaheshi, or Homagani, or Homeabemi.
Well, I've been thinking about this the past couple days, and in life, there's people that talk a lot but don't do anything. And you're one of those people that doesn't talk a lot but is doing everything.
Oh, thank you.
And we had you on KVMR on Indigenous Peoples Day in October, and I thought you were just tinkering away with language. I thought you were just tinkering away with waterways there at the Bear River. I thought you were just tinkering. And lo and behold, you came out the CEO or chairperson of Sierra Fund. You are putting together medicinal food information. You said things like responsible land management or ethical land management. So I am just looking forward today of sharing all this behind the scenes incredibleness that you bring to the table. So I don't even know where to start with you. I really don't.
It all comes together. I mean, we've been talking, as a family about this off and on for, obviously generations, but you and I for a number of years about having this conversation. And since we started talking about having the conversation, there's so many more to have now. And as you mentioned, I've just been recently appointed the CEO of the Sierra Fund, which I was serving on the board for about the last 3 years as a governing body member. And they've been working with local tribal groups in Nevada City and Grass Valley and the Colfax, Todd Valley and Nevada City tribal groups. And I think, the Maiduk Summit Consortium on meadow restoration, and then dealing with hydraulic mine remediation and the impacts of gold mine legacies on indigenous peoples and waterways, which are affecting all of us. But as we began to spend more time talking about this with the board, everybody understood it was clear that there needed to be understood or created or a place made for an indigenous space, particularly a space to occupy in a form of leadership and direction. And so over the past few years, we've talked about how we could go about doing that. And during that time have been hosting a summit of Sierra indigenous communities and peoples and, First Nations, and to try and define what that dialogue and movement may be. But we all agree that it's going to be centered around giving voice to the culture and to these places that mean so much to all of us, being here and how we're going to be here in the future, and these connections that we need to reestablish and strengthen. And so basically what we're involved in now is operationalizing a region-wide movement of like 44 tribal communities and federally recognized and non-recognized tribes and peoples in the Sierra bioregion around an indigenous-led vision of restoration and protection for the whole bioregion. And so that talks about, an economic alternative. That talks about foregrounding indigenous food sovereignty and seed banking. That talks about foregrounding language revitalization. That talks about foregrounding reparative justice and parallel eco-justice for the lands and the cultures that have been impacted and all the histories that have been interrupted over the last couple hundred years, including all of ours, Nisenan people and other peoples in the Sierra bioregion, but also all of our more than human relatives. And now you see this time has come because everybody's coming back together, and even our own relatives that I'm talking about. We have wolf packs now coming back into the Sierra valleys. You have elk herds restoring themselves, and hopefully more to come. But this isn't just done unto its own, and it's really important for us right now to step forward and take the leadership and kind of take over this discussion and reform the narrative around what the future of these bioregions are to be. And certainly they have to be connected, and that everybody that's working in this area, this space, has to understand and the fundamental reality of their interconnectedness to these bioregion and cultures, and how important it is to make way for indigenous-led protection and conservation
Well,
across.
let's lay the foundation real quick. So California has its own special history when it comes to dealing with the natives that were there first. Like there's paid genocide, there's toxic greed and gold rush and deforestation. Like, kind of set the framework of what's gone on that you're stepping into to fix for all of us.
Well, as you've touched on, we're still, hearing or feeling the echoes of that eco-cultural genocide that occurred here, and that was state sponsored here in California. And of course, California has a rich history to celebrate and the beauty of the lands, but a very, tragic, dark secret that keeps getting swept under the carpet about, government finance, hunting of indigenous peoples, and the original laws that were passed once a statehood, was being put underway and organized, were outlawing indigenous people's land practices and stewardship on the lands. And I think one of the first laws that was passed was outlawing cultural burning. And you can see articles of the earlier period where, people were allowed and encouraged to shoot Indians if they seen them out on the land, practicing cultural land practices, because it was just, and it was an obstruction to the future that was being envisioned at the time. And for even in the early days, moving beyond the genocidal periods, where, I mean, California actually enacted laws that publish and sold bonds, state-sponsored bonds, for the expeditions against Indians, which financed the militias and the bounties and the hunting day on Sunday, and all the things that was going on, and clearing the land and solving the Indian problem for the state of California. And in the work that we come across, you come across a lot of the literature that was of the period that was predicting the the end of indigenous societies and cultures here in California. And actually that was a necessity to facilitate their vision of statehood and prosperity. And so indigenous peoples were seen as an obstacle to the prosperity and enjoyment of nature for the longest time. And as you see, that's kind of being revisited and rediscussed in terms of the knowledge that Native peoples still maintain and have and practice, in terms of maintaining their culture and cultural connections to these beautiful places that define us, and how we define these places as indigenous people. The Sierra in particular is an example of the rich, biodiversity is a result of the relationship of the people on the lands. And so when native land practices and cultures were being removed, so was that relationship, and so began the decline in biodiversity and diversity in general, as we see right now across the board. And this is really nothing new for us, and actually the wisdom and knowledge that still is maintained and protected and safeguarded in the communities is what has allowed us to be here today and be able to talk to you about these things. And what's really good right now is that we're seeing that our ability to still maintain an intergenerational knowledge transfer, and getting access to some of our homelands is still occurring. And actually, in my experience, is getting stronger, just as I see younger generations of my family getting engaged into land management practices and really getting their hands back on their homelands and in their waters. So it's a good time, but there's a lot of legacy that we're trying to overcome, in terms of not only the impact on our cultures, but the interrupted histories and of the ecologies that we're so part of, and that we're working to sustain and protect and bring back to a condition where they can thrive. And this is where we're discussing, in this movement in the Sierra, about centering, indigenous voices, but most particularly the voice of the land and the voice of our more than human relatives, as well as recognizing Indigenous women as critical centers and cradles of culture, and then centering youth voices in this movement as well, with like the Flicker crews and the Hungalelti fire crews from Woodford's and all the other young people that are stepping forward and really getting into this work in a really good and healthy way.
Well, it is Native American Heritage Month. I want you to talk about the Lizzie Enos Foundation for just a moment, and let's honor that heritage. And I kind of just want to showcase the relentless, consistent work you and your family has done to reclaim a lot of this knowledge that you're passing on to the youth.
Nemkoto, which is our big grandma, Lizzie Enos, as we called her in our family, was my great grandmother, and she's certainly recognized. I'm looking at a photo of her right in front of me here, as a particular important foundation and informant on early California history and archaeology in particular. And so her information and works have informed the growth of, some major knowledge institutions and academies, based on the work that she did in the mid 19th, 20th century on recording Nisenan language and Nisenan lifeways, and working with various institutions, particularly Berkeley and the University of California system. So if you Google Lizzie Enos, you'll come up with a real big depth of kind of response of what she's done. And actually, the preservation work that she did with Nisenan language is still being used to inform contemporary language restoration programs here in the Sierra Bayou region now. And a lot of programs that are starting out their language projects and efforts based on the linguistic literature and tapes of Lizzie Enos that have been restored and are shared widely now with many language restorers and speakers. So back during the COVID time, we were working to create some space for our family and work with our members of our younger members in the family. And so the family established the Lizzie Enos Nisenan Family Foundation, as a project around language restoration, but it was a broader family memory project. And we were working on genealogies and historic heirloom collections that were of Lizzie Enos that have been lost out into the public domain, and maybe bringing some of that stuff back home. Her voice, her art, her thinking, and a lot of the information that's out in the public domain. And that was a project unto itself. She was a prolific basket weaver, but also there's a lot of film work that was done with her, and then certainly a lot of audio tapes and collections that are all over the United States. And so, and then there was another book that was published about her life. Actually, I have a copy of it right here, Uti. And we were building on the stories that she was telling and sharing with our family and others. I remember there was actually a black and white film made about that book, and it was shown through all the school districts when I was a young kid. And actually, Lizzie Enos would come into our class because she was my great grandmother. She'd come to the school and everything, and it was a big day. We were celebrated one day a year for sure at the school. But anyways, when we were beginning to work on the memory project, which was language, art, collections, archiving, finding old photos, and then organizing our language program around that, there was an area that was very important to us. And of course, Lizzie Enos were her village areas and the places where she grew up and lived and gathered and processed food and worked in these watersheds and helped maintain them. And one of them was in the Bear River watershed. And at the time, the Nevada Irrigation District proposed to build a dam right on top of the village site. And not only was that just bad enough as it was, but the river system has been, modified a lot over time. And on both sides of this proposal of the Centennial Dam or two other dams, that were actually built on our other village sites and burial sites. So if you go to Van Giesen or Crombie Reservoir, that actually is built on our family grave site and burial site. And it, they were able to take like a scoop out of the mound of the cemetery and kind of give it to our family, and we created another cemetery that we actually use even to this day with some of those ancestors that are there now. But for the most part, if you want to go and honor our relatives, the burial site's now part of the earthworks of that dam. And so that's pretty much, the cultural history and environmental history of that watershed and what we were working with. And so just the idea of another dam flooding another village area, just was really kind of hard to take again. And so we then organized ourselves around expressing and giving voice under the rights of nature doctrine to the Kumanseo, which is the traditional name of the Bear River, which means the river of the roundhouses, and begin to reshape the narrative about the history of the river as not just a storage facility or a source of agricultural water supply for the growth of the area, but more it's a living, thriving river of many parts actually that has this right to thrive and exist in its own way, and certainly a cultural that's a part of it. And so a lot of our work was just trying to talk to the GID and everybody else that was not a place where you just come and take things to sell, and there's more to it. And that was pretty much the vision that they had, was to try and create some water supply for the water marketing, water market, that's kind of creating going on all over California. So to make a long story short, about a month or so ago, the GID voted to vote down and not pursue the dam, which was kind of a nice, victory. But since the election, there's another governing body that's now in there that might be pro dam. So this is just something that we have to stay on top of all the time. And there are other interests that would like to have access to some of the supplemental or unadjudicated water rights that are associated with this whole interaction between these general improvement districts up and down the watershed. And so
wait, so we stopped the Centennial Dam.
Right.
There's documented village sites, family sites, gathering sites. With everything we know now, we're still at risk of this next administration undoing everything that you've done. Because I remember something about Nestle Water Company wanted the dam. So you can't exhale yet?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's a whole new. I mean, one of the tools that the coalition that was fighting against the dam, and it was tribal people and a lot of other citizen scientists and other people that enjoyed and wanted to protect the watershed in that part of the river, got together. One of the tools they used was the elections, and actually tried to vote in a more friendly governing body, and this was a couple elections ago. So that succeeded to a point, but it really never did succeed completely. So this has always been a kind of forestalled the dam. But right now, the argument from the General Improvement District is that it's just not economically feasible. It's got nothing to do with whether it's culturally or biologically or environmentally feasible. It's just in a way, they have a water right that they're trying to justify a project for, so they can justify the water right. So it's one of those things. It's a little more complicated and nuanced than that, but fundamentally, that's what's going on. That they're trying to maintain access to a historical water right that needs to be put to use and justified. And so they're kind of trying to find projects to justify, and actually to get a little deeper, they're trying to find demand that doesn't really exist to justify maintaining this water right. And with a fellow general improvement district downstream that would want to access to those I guess reallocation of rights through this administrative hearing process that's going on right now.
So can you explain for the rest of the class real quick? I thought that some of the agreements the government made with indigenous people was the right to water. So what's water rights and who actually has them?
Well, I'm not, real water attorney.
Okay.
Well, real good answer, but generally, the regime around water rights and the water allocation appropriation system that we're working with and that's impacting us, in a very deep and historic and long-term way is just as old as about 1914. It's an Western prior appropriation water allocation system that's being deployed here in the state of California. Um, it's funny, the question is kind of that you asked is really good, because in 1851 the United States and the state of California negotiated treaties, 18 of them here in the state of California. And we got to remember that 18 treaties only dealt with just a small fraction of the tribal people that were here in California that they talked to about these treaties. So it was deceptive in so many ways. One, that it was, settling, claims with all Indians in the state of California wasn't true. And then the fact that they negotiated these treaties and then purposely didn't ratify them, but enforced the tribes to live by their terms was, just pretty obvious what was going on. But in this case, the Treaty of Fort Union was negotiated for the Bear River watershed. I think it was like July 18th, 1851. And it did, and under legal doctrine, reserve rights for Nisenan people and those lands for the purposes of creating a Nisenan reservation there in the Bear River watershed. And if we have some maps, and we've been able to access the surveyor notes of that period, where they were surveying, the areas for Camp Far West, which was actually Fort Camp Far West, because they needed to create an army presence to deal with these troublesome Nisenan that they couldn't get out of the Bear River watershed at the time. But they also then, at that point, devised a treaty area that was the southern boundary, was where the dam is at Camp Far West out right now. And so we were able to get a hold of the surveyor notes and actually redrew, and created probably the most accurate alignment, for what it's worth, of that treaty boundary. And generally it goes from about Meadow Vista and Camp Far West, two straight lines north, with the Yuba River being the northern boundary and the Bear River being the southern boundary. So it's about 50 square miles area there, that would take, Colfax, Grass Valley, Chicago Park, a large part of these areas would have been on Nisenan Indian reservation. But under federal law and precedent, when you create an Indian reservation, you also create a reserved right for water for that reservation for the purpose of its establishment and its future. And so that's understood as under what's called the Winters Doctrine, and it's called a federally reserved water right, and for creation of that reservation. So some of the claims that we're making is that it was an unceded, unratified water right, because the tribe negotiated it and then it wasn't ratified. So that doesn't mean then it wasn't ceded. Or if it was negotiated and ratified, it was a ratified water right under the Winters Doctrine. But of course, when you apply water rights law and try and use it fairly with Indians, and then the whole thing, we're not supposed to apply those precedents, and in a way that works for the, it's told that's not applicable. I mean, there's a lot of different levels of how this is not, doesn't happen, but and we're not the only community that was affected by the non-ratification of the different treaties that happened. And as I said, there were 18 of them negotiated in California, but it was negotiated with a small fraction of California Native people, first of all. And, it did encumber all the lands that were considered Aboriginal territories in California, although they act like it did. And then there's been various efforts particularly with the federal government, to kind of still settle those unsettled questions with regards to, I think in the 60s, the Indian Claims Court discussed unsettled claims to California Indians, and then did a special appropriation to kind of pay off the Indians for their unsettled claims. And it was something like 12 cents to 22 cents an acre, that they did a redistribution. But the whole story of the Indian claims case, the Indian Claims Court, is just a whole story and a legacy of just more deception and dishonesty and misrepresentation.
I heard I heard that those treaties were literally just shoved in a drawer, and the
Right.
drawer was never opened again.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of literature. If you can again, check it out. But yeah, they're sometimes they're called the Barber treaties. But there were three different groups of commissioners. There were 9 commissioners that were sent out by, I think, President Harrison at the time, or I can't remember which president it was, um, to deal with the California Indian problem. And it was just the beginning of the formation of statehood, and they were trying to establish a solid footing of land tenure and ownership. And so the Indian question was a troublesome question. So rather than, one of the things they were worried about was a statewide Indian war. And so they felt that this was probably the best route to avoid that and kind of settle the question and be able to move on in an expeditious or a simpler or more direct way. And so 3 commissioners divided the state up into thirds. One group negotiated with a bunch of tribes. Anyways, I think they did 6 to 6 treaties for peace. They then were sent, and actually the the executive branch, the president and the Department of Interior, they were all in favor and tried to get this done. But when they got to the Senate for the ratification, the powers in California, the public powers, the media, the papers, and the legislature and the governor interceded and convinced the Senate not to ratify them. And they put him under an injunction of secrecy for 50 years and put him in a drawer, like you said, literally. And they couldn't be seen for 50 years. Although they didn't tell the tribes or the Indian people that they weren't ratified. And they informed them, convinced them that the treaties were in place. And so the tribal people began to, honor the treaties and live by their terms, and moved to these areas to find out that there was no reservation land, and they were homeless at that point, and they had vacated their other homelands and they were taking over rather quickly. And there was a lot of discussion about the treaties of whether tribes should even get compensated for land because they needed the equipment, uh, to work the land and become pastoral citizens and kind of assimilate into the agricultural vision of the state of California, which actually is based on indigenous knowledge and tech, and actually the irrigation lines and all the cultivation areas that were in this area were Nisenan to begin with. And so it's just another crazy story and layer that I know here in Placer County, they talk about the rich historical agricultural history of Placer County in California. But if you look at the early literature, it was based on it. There was Nisenan farmers and Nisenan water systems. And actually these Nisenan people that they had deceived with the Treaty of Fort Union that had moved down to Wheatland and down into Lincoln and all those areas that were the basis of the new agricultural base for those areas, which now they call their own. But that was, they were originally established by the Nisenans that were forced out of their lands up in the upper part of the watershed. And so kind of losing my thought there, but but there was a lot of dispute whether even to do that. A lot of people just thought they should just exterminate, Native people. That would have been, and that's what they were doing with the bonds and the militias and the bounties and, the hunting down of Indian men, women, and children. I mean, yes, there's just crazy stories, but there was a lot of people that were against the treaties because they were thinking, well, if we, create reservation lands and then we give them the implements to work those lands, they're soon going to lose them because they're going to be stolen by the people that live around them, either by bad trading or they're just going to outright steal it from the Indian people. And so there was always this thing of not giving Native people good stuff anyways, because they always knew it was going to get stolen or taken. And I remember reading, and somewhere else, someone asked Abe Lincoln, I think it might have been after this period, whatever, because it reminds me of this story over and over again. Someone asked him if he knew what an Indian reservation was. He goes, yeah, I know what it is. It's a place where Indians live surrounded by thieves. And so that story really plays itself out. If you look at the records and the testimony and the written record of the treaty negotiations, that theme kind of goes through them quite clearly, that a lot of people are worried about, well, if we even create these areas for tribal peoples, how long will they be able to hold on to them before the encroachment takes over and everybody steals everything from them because they're not protected by the civil laws? Indians at that point weren't considered citizens or in some cases human beings, so they were not protected by the civil and criminal laws of the state. So they were just targets for abuse and violence and and just, just nastiness.
Yeah,
And
you couldn't even testify in court about somebody committing a crime against you.
no, they were the early source of labor. I mean, there was a real big, interest in outplacing Indian children into farming families or whatever for, early, life term support. There were civil laws passed, vagrancy laws, so you can arrest an Indian and create a fine, which then had to be worked off, and or engines put into for auction for labor, and of course, you'd never be able to work off that debt, and so some Indians, spent their whole time in indenturement because the cost of their care and their maintenance and all always was exceeding the cost of what they were supposedly being paid. So they were in this perpetual, peonage system of labor, which pervaded throughout California, and it wasn't just established by the Americans. It was here with the Spaniards and the Russians and the Mexicans. Early on, before statehood as well, deployed the same system of a two-tiered system of justice and citizenship. I want to call it that, at the bare minimum. But so yeah, the whole treaty making history and kind of all about that may seem historic, but it really echoes into today what's going on when we're talking about indigenous water governance. Or history is more about place than time. So we're still working in these very same areas and, trying to reclaim these ecologies and protect our ancestors' graves still and create some space, not only for ourselves, but for, the species and our more than human relatives and, the ecologies that are so important to us that we're now involved in reclaiming. And so it's kind of, I would say, kind of gone full circle. This is work that everybody's been doing for a long time. I remember as a young man when I was growing up in Auburn, I was talking to my brother Alan about it. And my earliest memories were these lines of men with gunny sacks going on and burning, out on the land, a long time ago, and just doing communal land management, and kind of, in the old way. But, still, those are some really early memories that, always stick out in my mind of the
It's beautiful.
and it's kind of cool.
But so you're reclaiming, people are listening, but in the Sierra Nevada mountains around your ancestral homelands, there is what I see permanent damage done to a lot of these ecological systems. There's bodies of water up at North Bloomfield that I'm assuming they're just going to be toxic forever. So I think it's great, but I also feel like they totally Godzilla'd and stomped all over this place, and now they put you in charge to fix 100 years of nonsense.
Pretty much. And we're doing first, working with, just doing our work as Native people, doing our, working together, sharing each other's histories and getting about the work of respectful collaboration now. Just because, what you talk about, what's at stake is so important and so valuable. And, the land will, I mean, this is an old place, and there's a lot of strength and power, that can be reconnected, and we need to reconnect too, that allowed us to live here for thousands of years together, a relationship with these lands. And so there is a healing power that exists. We just kind of got to let it, get out of its way, and not us, but, the rest of society, and kind of let this happen and let Native people kind of take foreground their knowledge and efforts and their culture across the planet. And you see this happening in Australia, Africa, South America, Asia, where we see a movement of indigenous peoples now, kind of reclaiming this, not necessarily reclaiming this, but reasserting in a larger way the responsibility of protecting, these habitats and these cultures and these relationships, and how are they important to everybody else. And not be put in a position that, indigenous peoples are being looked at, or their knowledge or are more than human analogs. If you want to talk like people are using beavers now for beaver dam analogs, so it's indigenous and more than human restoration we're talking about. That they're not seen as some kind of Swiss Army knife of restoration, so we can fix things and everybody go about redoing their bad behavior, or we'll have more water, because of what the tribes are doing or whatnot. And our whole point is, we're doing this for these lands and these cultures and these ecologies, and that way, but also retooling the people, with kind of modern, contemporary tools, and matching it up with their knowledge, and giving them a little more reach and a little more impact and efficacy in when we work with our aligned partners or people that we need to convince. And then also a large part of it is just reclaiming the narrative. We always say this. We don't need a new AI. We need a new narrative. It's not a new science. We just need a new narrative, a way of looking at the world and living in it. And so that's just what we're pushing right now. And so we're finding a lot of open ears and hearts now that we've begun, kind of assert that we're here, and that the Sierra Fund is an indigenous and led and governed entity that's focused exclusively on the well-being and richness of tribal ecologies and communities, and that we're going to lead the way, and not wait for others to align. We're not about aligning with other people's movements or partnerships or whatever. It's centering our work first, and they come, and because in the end, people think, well, you need our resources, or you need our agreements or our jurisdiction, but we don't need that to be a cultural people or speak our language, or to dream about, good futures and healthy native people and healthy native lands and cultures and communities that grow and thrive. Our form of resistance is dreaming and futuring and getting our hands in the land and telling stories and remapping, and drawing new maps for our children to follow. As we've talked about, the tracks that snow that we follow here in the Sierra Nevada are very, very old, and they're still there. So it's really not about us being lost our way. It's just, finding our way. And, as soon as we can get to a place and get the whole community up to a higher level where we can see where these tracks are, others have been there before, and they're just waiting for us to join them, so I have a lot of hope, and there's a lot of hope in the community that the work that we're doing is you can feel the power of it now, and being animated by a spirit of well-being and relationship is something that gives you power, and in a way kind of inoculates to me, what's going on now in the world that, we're seeing. I mean, you can get a little distracted with what's going on maybe in the political world or whatnot, but you just got to keep the focus on what we're doing. And it's about knowledge and culture, not money and status, or material.
You got me believing. So I was born in 80, so I'm right in the middle of the fearful elders in my life and the hopeful youth that followed me. But I was taught to avoid organizations like the Sierra Fund because conservation doesn't necessarily mean it has indigenous, pro-indigenous aspects to that. But you have completely shifted that, which is huge to me.
Yeah, I mean, even some way, the big question is, what is the contemporary or historic conservation movement going to do to make way, to get out of the way, to make room for indigenous-led and centered conservation and protection? And how are they going to support that? And then how are they going to now remember what it's like to enter into an ethical space of relationships where where it's rooted in truth and openness, and you can have dialogue that's not only multi-generational, but it could be even multi-species in a way that's just rooted in this type of affirmative collaboration at every level. And so and then when we were talking about the treaty period, and then it's almost could be interpreted, well, they were out of their element, and they didn't know what treaties were, and didn't know how to get, no, but that's really not true. Native people have been in this ethical space from time immemorial, and this is the space where we created, the constructs and, the accommodations of coexistence and respect among other communities and other nations that we shared these areas with. This was the space where we entered in to develop strong relationships with our more than human world and relationships with these ecologies. And so when we're now talking with these aligned groups or allies that want to work with us, we have to remind them that, first step is having the ability to maintain yourself and your integrity to enter into this space with us. Or do you have what it takes is to enter into an ethical space that's rooted in truth and openness? Can you exist there? Do you have the tools to work with this? Because that's where the collaboration that lasts, and works exists. And that's why nothing works all the time. And and you see this consultation stuff that's going around now with federal and state entities that they want to work with Indians, and as you talked about the past, not only conservation movement, but general community that works with tribal people in general was kind of coming from an extractive nature in the first place. And, they were extracting knowledge, extracting language, extracting culture, extracting medicine, extracting knowledge and resources and whatnot. So, like you touched on, there's a general sense of mistrust with, conservation communities or land managers, that want to come and, fit our knowledge into their administrative vision to how to manage a resource and how to get sustainable yields and how to monetize nature and life in general. And so that's it's certainly still there. For the longest time, indigenous peoples, like as I mentioned, were seen as obstacles to the enjoyment of nature within the private and public conservation community. And there was still, and we still run into it, even in the language that you hear today, the pristine wilderness, and that, the ultimate wilderness was a peopleless wilderness where, there was a void of human presence. And that's just completely a misunderstood concept of, what was here when non-Indians came to this area. These were managed and well-tended lands for generations of relationships and thrived and abounded because of those bonds. And so we see what has happened with the interruption of these connections and criminalization of just native culture and native land management. And so fundamentally, as crazy as it sounds, some of the basic work and advocacy that we have to do with the Sierra Fund is decriminalizing indigenous people being engaged in managing their historic, their cultural landscapes and ecologies.
Well,
Even
you keep mentioning this word ethical.
Mm-hmm.
In our history as indigenous peoples, and now learning, from the California treaties, we do things first in good faith, and
Right.
that's shot us in the foot a few times. But you're still living that way, but you have the boundary of show me that ethical respect. I don't know. It's
Well, ethical space isn't, or ethics or ethical, respect. It's not, as it's not it's not seen as a courtesy or something of good manners. It's actually a survival skill. It is a basic truth of survival is ethics and ethical relationships and understanding with not only each other, but our more than human relatives and the rest of life. Is this, it's a standard of survival, not just of good manners. And so this is intricate and related as just the basic fundamental of interconnectedness, understanding, of the foundation of reality, an interconnected world. And so, it's as equal as the truth is, breathing air, or, there's some real, just true truths. And that's one of them, is that, ethical relationships and respect is not just a courtesy, it's a matter of survival.
agreed. But you're setting that standard not just as a demand, but as an example. You walk that talk of yours in 2 languages.
Yeah, we try our best. It's it's every day. You get up, chop wood, do this stuff, and right now it's a good time. I've had the privilege of working in in tribal affairs. Gosh, it's the 70s. So it's a handful of decades, and seeing a lot up and down and around, and just been privileged to work with a really a large number of really good people that taught me a lot and supported, my, the work, and just really taught me a lot. I mean, and so, and then just been lucky enough to kind of last this long. Um, but this is a good time, you see, just, I mean, part of the work is, that, this movement, this indigenous, foregrounding indigenous led conservation and protection, and people are starting to understand that, respect it. It's just, we want to make sure that this is the flavor of the month kind of thing, that this has to be real, and it has to last, and you really have to be committed to this kind of work, and these relationships and partnerships for them to give us a future that's sustainable and real. Um, but I see young people now out there, doing tech, and, you see a lot of programs and institutions at the academic level, where you actually have schools of indigenous thought, and food sovereignty is really becoming, now just people not say, oh, it's just a food thing. They understand it's a way of life, and how food sovereignty connects with the rest of the world. And so I guess we're just giving it a little bit more breathing room and a lot more space right now. We're really taking it and running it with it. But that's not saying that it hasn't been happening before. There's been people that have been ongoing for a long time doing this work, and keeping it alive, and they need to be recognized. And it's because of their efforts is why this is succeeding now. But we also have to remember, in looking what we're doing here in the Sierra Nevada, in this bioregion with our communities, we're looking and borrowing from experiences of other indigenous communities around the world. I mean, you see a lot of progress being made on indigenous-led and conservation protection in Canada and Vietnam and Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Northern Europe, Asia. So the move is widespread, and it's occurring everywhere. It's just that what we're working against is really heavy, and and it's widespread as well. So, but it's good to see now that there's a lot of people in this area, or not would call it space, but just doing this. So there's a lot more people to work with, I guess, and that are doing the same thing.
Well, let's talk about the youth. You've been doing this and working this and consistently paying attention to all of this. And then the youth move in and just take it and run, and holy heck.
Mentoring has always been something that's been important, to me, and I think to everybody, and certainly the whole idea of intergenerational knowledge transfer in our community is so critical and important. But it can't happen without having access to the lands, and so it just keeps coming back to the land question, or the land issues again. Is we need to create these spaces and places where Native people and elders and children and communities can come together and just exist and thrive and work together on these important things. Um, but there's that doesn't mean that. I mean, indigenous people are everywhere. We have thriving urban Native communities that are doing a lot. I mean, you see indigenous communities that are in the middle of urban settings reclaiming lands, and doing homeland restoration in the Bay Area or other, places. So it doesn't have to be out, in connecting and, in, uh, an indigenous conserved or protected area, if you want to call it that, which is a technical term, can be a gathering site, or it can be a watershed, or a forest, or a mountain range. It's all indigenous, and it's all connected, and it's all important. And so whether we do it, piece by piece, acre by acre, burn by burn, watershed by watershed, they're all steps forward in, we're moving us forward and moving us together, I guess. But
Oh, go ahead.
no, I'll just say, so I mean, you see a lot. I've been working, now kind of jumping back into this conservation and restoration kind of space, and I see lots and lots of indigenous youth, young people here now. I see a lot of people that are, degreed, that don't even look like they're still in high school, that are out there with doctorates that are doing really good work. And so there's a lot of really good energy that's going on right now within the what I would consider the younger, part of our community. And they're providing a lot of really good leadership and a lot of really just positive and strong energy that just really helps sustain me, particularly because it's just, we've always talked about, working hard and doing everything we can to raise a generation of children to match these mountains. And now I get to work with that generation of children, and it's really makes you feel really good. And that, they're there with the truest of hearts, and that they're working to get the knowledge to prepare themselves for every contingency, and, we get to talk to them about, things like what Nemkoto taught us, Lizzie, Enos, that you were talking about earlier about, sharing the things that you love the most, um, learn early in life, taste, the happiness, of giving, and then learn early in life the beauty of generosity, you know, and learn to judge others by their best moments. And, you know, like we say all the time, living in a world where every face has a right to kisses. And I think that's the thing that I find so hopeful, that it's the spirit and the openness that the younger generation is coming with right now. They exude that spirit and understanding. And it doesn't take much explanation to right now for people to get that in our community. It's really good to see.
But they don't have, like, I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of who I came from. But the second I leave that safety bubble, I'm not ashamed, but it feels like society never cared about the indigenousness. And it seems like the youth don't have that self-doubt, weird stigma, head, that a lot of us older Indians carry around. And that's kind of incredible.
Somehow they got over it, or didn't
Yep.
get, and they just not bothered by it. And then, they don't, they moved on. And it just feels so good to see that. I'm working like with Sadie and Marcus, and then, they have that Flickr crew that's going with the Colfax Todd Valley Consolidated Tribe. And they're doing real progressive land ecocultural restoration. And these are young hands on old lands, and they're feeding the land with their spirit, and they're getting fed by the land with the knowledge, and it's just working really well. And you can see the land that's responding, and they're responding so strongly to what's happening right now. It's just so strong to see. They're working with, actually, those kids, young people are working with Indigenous people of First Nations up in British Columbia, and they're trading back knowledge and tools to do widespread ecocultural restoration on native lands. And they're repairing watersheds and doing meadow restoration with these tools that they've been working and tooling and sharpening with their Canadian partners. And now I see they're going to come down here and start doing some biological restoration work with the California communities. And this is all kind of youth led and happening. And now it's really inspiring. And you're seeing elders out there on the land with young people and just spending time out there and just getting stronger.
Was it you or Annie Wallace that sent me the information on all these medicinal foods PDF? I received those things, and I still feel like I have to guard it like a secret. Like you guys sent me something special, and we can never talk publicly about it, and or they're gonna, or the non-native world is gonna take our knowledge and twist it or use it to their advantage or break it. Is that something that you guys still feel? Or like when you did the conference right before Indigenous Peoples Day, your summit there at Shingle Springs, again, is giving this knowledge out going to bite us in the behind at some point?
One of the things we talked about, you're touching on, and it's becoming a term or whatever, is Indigenous data sovereignty, which kind of gets on what you're talking about. But there's more to it than just the word Indigenous data sovereignty to me, because it's about culture and reconciliation of history. As you said, there's such this long relationship with bad faith and extraction of culture, and is being misused and misapplied, against us in a lot of ways. And you kind of see that today, but there, you have to do something about it. And so some communities are stepping forward right now and begin to work in this space called Indigenous data sovereignty, and creating protocols and frameworks for communities where they can kind of control and have access, control and protect their own knowledge from today forward, and then kind of guide how they interact with the outside world that you're talking about, or collaborate with partners, or how they kind of allow some of this knowledge to be accessed or shared. And that's kind of prospective and today into the future. Another part of this, and it's a project that Marcus and Sadie are kind of part of in a way, because it kind of feeds their effort, is reclaiming indigenous data, where you have knowledge that was been extracted from communities or whatever, that's either being controlled by other institutions or monetized, like academic institutions always monetizing the research and knowledge that they got from indigenous people for their own purposes, and not necessarily for the purpose of the community that they extracted it from. And then you have the whole thing about monetizing indigenous knowledge, in foods, the food sovereignty question, or in medicine, or science, or bioscience, or genomic science. I mean, even a way we're having to deal with this extraction of our genetic information, even when you're talking about genes and the genome work. I remember being involved in this back in the early 90s, when they discovered, and they were trying to crack the code on the genomics, and there was that whole period of communities were worried about vampire extraction of our genetic information. There were doctors that were running around gathering genetic material from tribal communities without any informed consent, or any kind of idea or informing in what actually that research and knowledge was being used for. But also kind of in a way where there's knowledge that agencies or entities that are doing work, and they say for tribal communities, they're using tribal information, but they're not allowing those resources to get to the tribal community. And I would say, like in the emergency preparedness space, the public funding space, the environmental risk space, all kinds of areas where institutions that are around tribal communities, like I mentioned earlier, the one that Abe Lincoln we're talking about, are using indigenous information to fund their own efforts, saying that they're serving indigenous communities, but they're not. Or in some ways, that information is even being used against indigenous communities. I came across an example not too long ago where there was genetic information that was, I think, harvested by the CDC or Indian Health Service down in Dene territory. It might have been at Fort Defiance community or something, and it was COVID information that the community had to gather and share to get access to the COVID response money, for the tribal community. And so when they had shared and gave that epidemiological information to the CDC and the federal government as part of the funding relationship, when they needed to get that access to that information for future planning, to map out vulnerabilities and to kind of develop a tribal response for the future and prepare that community, those agencies wouldn't give that data back to the tribe. And so that's like current today stuff still. So the whole idea of data extraction and mining is still a very living threat, that actually threatens our well-being and our lives in a very real way. And so there's just all other thing, and then the whole story of subjugated knowledge systems, where like Lizzie Enos's data, that's just been recently being, it's been available, but widespread, not it's just only been current, recent times that those collections have been made available by these, very well-established and famous academic knowledge institutions, that have been gathering this information of Northern or California tribal cultures forever. I mean, some of them built their institutions on this knowledge. I mean, if you look at the phenomenon with Ishi and, the low, the Berkeley, School of Anthropology wouldn't exist without, all what happened there. It still goes on, the whole issue, the whole question, or dialogue or the whole matter of indigenous water governance and water rights that's going on here in Northern California, with the tunnels and the dewatering of the delta, and the effect of and looking to the headwaters of the Sierra for more water source, to subsidize, or to be turned into subsidized water access or marketing for larger growth in communities in Southern California, or in Bay Area or the Valley. So
How are you so mellow? You're just such a chill, loving, go with the flow guy. And all these things you're telling me are making me part crazy. 'Cause
Yeah, it's I don't know. I get it. I mean, I think about it, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard not to be affected by it, you know. I mean, in a way, because it does kind of hurt your heart, and you think about, you know, the things that happened on these lands to your own family, you know, generations ago that still impact. There's stories that I were, you know, that were passed on from Lizzie Enos about Sutter's, you know, people coming up and harvesting, you know, stealing Indians and the violence that they did to our own family that still echo in our family. And I remember those stories when I was told, like 7 or 8 years old, about just the violence that occurred right here, you know, where I live. And I still feel the crack in my soul from the first time I heard that story, you know, and it still just really impacts me. And so, but it just drives me
mm,
work harder, you know, in a way, and that I owe this to those people, you know, that they somehow gave up all their many tomorrows for our today, as they say, you know. And so um, we have nothing but a responsibility to those generations, and then the ones, you know, the unborn ones too. You know, this is the work that we're supposed to do, and you just take it and do it. There's so much to do. I mean, you know,
but you're just one person with two hands and one brain.
oh,
Like it it feels daunting, but I don't even remember if I asked you because again, I love it because you can talk. I do very little. I turn your mic on and I let you school all of us. Did I even ask you like what is the Sierra Fund? And now that we're an hour into this,
I hope it makes sense. I just kind of feel like I'm rambling on, but
no, it
um,
all it all makes beautiful sense. So I guess we're gonna tie all of this together with
well, the Sierra Fund,
specifically the Sierra Fund. Yeah.
sure. Sierra Fund's been around for about 23 years, and it was one of those original conservation entities, you know, nonprofits that you were talking about. That was here in the Sierra Nevada, and you know, over the last decade or so, there's been a number of them, you know, that have sprung up. You know, that they're doing conservation work in the Sierra Nevada. Um, this Sierra Fund actually started out as a fund, as I understand. You know, it used to give out funds to support, you know, enrichment of the biodiversity and protection of the, you know, the ecologies and the beauty of the Sierra Nevada, as I understand it. And then over the last 10 or 12 dozen years or so, it has really set the bar, a high bar, on response and planning and building capacity within the area, the region, and actually dealing with it hands on, the epidemic or the problem of hydraulic mine remediation and the legacy of hydraulic mine gold mining in the Sierra Nevada, which is still plaguing a lot of communities with acid mine drainage and mercury source contamination and water quality problems that are still affecting the Sierra Nevada and the communities that reside there. That stuff never left, and so there is just a tremendous problem that has to be dealt with yet. And the Sierra Fund was um, leading the charge and in the forefront of dealing with that very serious problem. So that's what attracted me to the board when they invited me to join their governing body about 3 years ago. Because in my past experience in working as the chair at the Washoe Tribe, I had spent a number of years dealing with the Leviathan mine up in Alpine County, which was this gigantic open pit gold mine that had just rendered part of the reservation lifeless, but was impacting all the downstream communities, including the first communities were the tribal communities, but of course the cities of Gardnerville and Minden and then Carson City and, you know, that whole part of the western Nevada was impacted by this gigantic mine that was still draining AMD, acid mine drainage, into the West Fork of the Carson River. But the lands that had rendered useless before that were tribal lands. And so, again, we were impacted and still continue to be impacted by this mine. So that was a whole another story of, you know, dealing and suing the state of California and BP and ARCO and, you know, kind of a whole story there. But um, so when I seen the Sierra Fund was, you know, dealing with probably one of the most difficult problems in the Sierra, I thought, well, these are my people, you know. So, and they are already dealing and working with, you know, some other tribes in the area around Nevada City and Carson City. But as I said earlier, as we began doing this work with the communities and expanding what we were trying to do and doing the summit, and the community of the summit kept getting larger and larger and larger, and the voice of the summit is pretty much our instructions. The summit is our advisory committee, so to speak, for this nonprofit governing body in this direction. So we take our orders from the summit, and every year we kind of work on a program, and then we get back together again at the summit. So, but this last September, the governing body decided, after thinking about this, and to vote themselves out and vote in a new governing body of all indigenous tribal members from throughout the Sierra bioregion. So they decided to make room and do what they needed to do to step aside to facilitate indigenous-led conservation and protection. So they decided to turn over their organization and their assets, and then appointed me from the governing body to be the CEO of launching this new entity and this new movement, and retooling the Sierra Fund from a conservation entity into an indigenous-led organization. In the process, the hydraulic mine restoration assets that we were working with and the science capacity of the Sierra Fund then moved to Moortown and some other communities that we were partnering with. And we transferred all of our funds and gave it to the tribes so they can have everything they could to succeed. But also they were in a position to scale up the hydraulic mine restoration work to a larger way than the Sierra Fund could anyways. So in a way, it was kind of a natural progression of, creating a partnership and then allowing the groups to get started, get the science down, and then scale it up. So we took all of our hydraulic mine money and gave it to Moortown and some other communities. So now we're just starting out as the Sierra Fund, an indigenous-led entity, and what I've been doing is fundraising and messaging and getting our face out there, our movement out there within the Sierra bioregion and the other environmental community, but also establishing relationships with the state of Nevada and the state of California and those entities. So when you see, I think I shared with the agenda of the last summit, we had the governor's representatives and all the conservation and land management executives and bodies represented at our summit. And the summit is intended to be an indigenous eyes only kind of effort in the beginning, but now it's a 2-day event with a third day that's open to allies. And it's become kind of a popular event now. And we had a really overwhelming response to the third day of alignment and allyship. So we had officials from the federal government and the state government show up that wanted to be part of the summit to work with the tribes that were gathered there. And the value, I think, of what the community is finding is they really appreciate the ability to get together as indigenous people, for the first few days, just as our own, and talk about our own issues and get into our own spaces and create our own psychologically safe spaces for us to do our work, rooted in truth and openness. And then get about the work of respectful collaboration by, sharing our histories and the things. And a lot of us are raising families together in one way or the other, but at different levels of work. The Sierra and redefining our own legibility of the bioregion and our communities. There's such a rich and diverse number of languages that are spoken in the Sierra bioregion, numbers of different communities, from high desert, Eastern Sierra bioregion to the wetlands of the rich Sacramento Valley and the deltas and the headwaters throughout the Sierra and all the different rivers up and down the western slope. So there's a lot of rich cultural and ecological biodiversity that has been here for thousands of years. And actually, I think it still is. But prior, the Sierra Nevada was considered a climate, a global hotspot, and it was one of the richest places of life on the planet for a long, long time.
You mentioned the summit and the third day being open to allies. I wanted to what does it mean to be a good ally, and kind of what do you guys look for in an ally?
That's a really good question, because that's kind of, I would say, an open question, but that is one of the questions that we continue to want to develop. And what is a good ally? Because allies are asking us, how do I be a good ally? What is a good ally? First it's, trustful, good faith. But when we talked about alignment and allyship, we pointed to the theme of the third day and said, okay, the first step is, understanding what an ethical relationship and an ethical space is that we're asking you to enter into here, because we've been here for 2 days already, say this last summit and the one before, in this space, in this cultural space of protection and in spiritual strength. And so if you want to enter this space with us, you have to come in on our terms. So right off the bat, we kind of make clear what is the conditions of, coming into that space, and this, wanting to come in the spirit to co-create and co-develop solutions, is coming in there to understand that indigenous knowledge and wisdom is equal to Western science, if not superior. It's coming into a space where you don't need one system to validate the other. And it's coming into a space where, it's not a check the box, or you're just not going to come here and harvest what you need and then move on and say, hey, we've talked to the Indians and now we have their endorsement or stamp of approval, or we've run this by the tribes and now we can proceed with what we want to do, which has generally been the process leading up to now and still continues today. And this is one of the things that we're working with, and actually was one of the purposes of creating the summit, was to kind of understand that there's a need for not necessarily a universal but unified voice of culture and indigenousness, but particularly associated with giving voice to the land and to the more than human community that we share that area with. And that's the purpose of the summit, is to center that voice and create that space to co-create. And so people that want to come to us and align and say, what do I do to be a good partner? You first have to understand these are the conditions of what we're working in, and you have to be able to survive and thrive in a space that's rooted in truth and openness. Uh, and so that's the first step. And I think once we get doing work there, everything else just kind of develops. You develop, you develop bonds of allyship and alignment, and it's about, centering indigenous wisdom and knowledge, most importantly, and then honoring the voice of the land and recognizing that it has the right to thrive and exist as well.
So, couple months back, maybe even last year, because I do radio and people think that I am the encyclopedia or the Rolodex of indigeneity. So I got an email from like a group in Placerville. They wanted to do a land acknowledgement when they did whatever they were doing. Okay, that's cool. But they contacted me saying, we want somebody to give us a land acknowledgement in the language of the land. And I kind of wigged out. No. We're not going to give you, thank you for acknowledging the land we're on. But I didn't think it was appropriate for a non-native to take native language, butcher it, and then pass it on to make their organization look good. Like, I know their intention was to be cool, but it just seems like some things don't. It still felt demanding. It didn't feel like, hey, I want to align. It felt like, hey, give me something I can use to make us look like we care.
It's sad. I get it that, extraction or, the default impulse is appropriation, right? And, however you kind of, mean it, but in the end, it's just, again, another level of appropriation. And everybody, we all understand, you understand, and many others now getting it, it's more than acknowledgement. You have to, think beyond acknowledgement, even just in the beginning of, if you're going to acknowledge that, you need to then also start acknowledging and coming to terms of what your presence means to these lands and the effect that you're having. And what are you going to do about the effect and impact that your presence is having on these indigenous lands? And what are you going to do to allow that spirit to come forward and the people that lived in those lands, to have a relationship and center, and foreground, their culture and their vision. So an acknowledgement, like you say, it's just, city councils, or I see, the kind of intent. I said, oh, it's good intent, but in the end, yeah, it's just, it's patronage.
That's the word. That's what it feels like. Thanks for joining us. Good. Thanks for the land and all. I don't know. It gives me I call it the ick. I get the ick.
Red washing, is another term, it's teching. There's this whole thing called the tech rush, that's going on within the public land managers of wanting to, use tech like it's a plug and play app, or that, you can use it in a static way to kind of just enrich or, kind of make it look like tech aligns with your vision of the future that you want Indians to agree with in the first place. It's got nothing to do with, their vision. And so you see it applied a lot. And so there's a lot of work. I think there's a group called the Red Buds. I just came across them because they asked to join, darn it, our summit. And out of Santa Rosa, the Red Bud Society, I think.
We're
They're
looking
real,
at that.
and they have gotten really deep into this land acknowledgement space and done a lot of guidances and really good work in working with indigenous communities about, breaking through that and breaking down that whole kind of perspective of, and really pushing beyond land acknowledgement and getting out of there. I think
It says, are they part of the California Native Plant Society?
I think so.
Yes. So it is Redbud, and then that website is cnps.org.
I think, is that the Red Bud group?
Yeah, they're the chapter of the California Native Plant Society.
There might be a different one I'm talking about.
Okay.
Oh, darn me.
No, you do your Google, because I'm doing banners like, I love you, Annie. And I'm doing banners like, Sadie, you're a rock star. It's true. And I'll do another banner of, congrats, Brooklyn. Love you, girl. You got an incredible family. I'm super jealous. Trying to marry into it, but we'll see.
Oh yeah, we'll put that out there.
I'm like a feral cat. You know what I mean? I just need some food and water left out and a warm place to sleep. I don't need much.
Red Bud Resource Group. I'm sorry.
Redbud Resource Group. I love this. I love that we're all learning this together. It's important. Because I really do believe, Brian, that people's hearts are in the right place.
There's a lot of people that are willing to help, that have a lot of good energy and good knowledge to share, that for all the right reasons. And so it was really kind of powerful to see the response we had for the third day of people alignment and the people that showed up. A lot of land trusts, a lot of public land entities, a lot of county level land managers that, that are on the ground. You can tell a lot of them are already working with tribal communities and are getting it. So it was kind of, the summit's kind of creating a home for everybody that didn't exist. And so everybody's kind of coming together. So there's a lot of good partnership and alignment and fellowship out there from, our non-native partners and community. That's really good work. And, and we need and will help because, what we're talking about at the Sierra Fund and other groups, we're in.
Oh no, did I lose my friend? We're gonna give Brian a minute to see whose internet destroyed who. So when we get Brian back, if we get Brian back, that's the joy of modern amenities. So the Redbud Resource Group, Native curriculum by Native people, right? So it's not somebody from the outside observing and telling people what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's us telling people what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I don't know what not trying to rain on his parade and all the good work, but in my short middle-aged lifetime, I've seen who we are used to benefit everybody else except us, which is very kind of strange. So, Brian, I was just putting up the Redbud Resource Group and talking about how I'm not trying to rain on your parade and the good work you're doing, but being cautiously optimistic, I guess. I I want to believe in a better future, but it's hard when the political climate is changing. It's hard when who we are is sometimes a trend. It goes up and down. Natives are so hot right now. And then we're forgotten about. And like Brian was saying, who we are being put into books that are sold that nobody shares in the profits of. And it's Brian, I believe in the future you're trying to build for your kids and grandkids' grandkids. Um, but it is I'm cautiously optimistic and I'm just impressed and proud of you and your beautiful family.
Oh, thank you. I mean, there's so many forms of resistance: storytelling, reclaiming, remapping, gendering, indigenizing, uh, you know, writing. There's just all these different forms for us that we can take at every level to kind of move the ball forward and knit everything back together and make it stronger. And so I just really like thank you and everybody else that's doing all this different work, because it's all moving it forward in a strong and good way. And there's so many ways to use your indigenous power for resistance and moving us forward.
Well, I'm going to make a little joke. Let's talk about Darksiders. How how does being a DJ? How is that a form of resistance? What's up,
I've
Aaron?
I've been I went on tour with them once, but they keep saying, "Come on with us, it's fun," and it is fun, It's just generations, but wow, talk about wanting to see culture thrive. The movement among young artists right now is just on fire, and it's crazy good. And I've been to just all kinds of really good, just gatherings, but I mean Navajo heavy metal festivals. Hard dance, all these different kind of genres that I just kind of passed me by, but now connecting back in with Aaron and his Darksiders movement. And so what he's doing is just creating a whole new level of music in a space that's already kind of like industrial type music, but it's rooted in culture and language. And he's not the only one. I've ran into Metlakatla, young and Native Alaskan youth out on the stage that are doing their stuff. I've seen a lot of indigenista, going on. A lot of women in this world doing just really hard stuff. But they're all coming from a cultural background. A lot of them are illiterate already in their language. They're speaking. Some of them are very fluent. So the music thing is really bringing it together to me. And I never really, really paid that much attention to it. But now you have all these really nice festivals that are going on. If you get to go to like Gathering of Nations, there's this whole just music element to it, or even like Indian Market up in Santa Fe in August. There's just this whole music and actually art and fashion and all this other stuff that's going down at the same time. But yeah, the young people are hitting it hard, man, and it's really good to see, and they're doing it in a really good way. So actually, Aaron just got back a couple of days ago. He was touring in Tokyo, so he was over there pushing Darksiders movement and indigeneity and what's going on with hard dance culture and native music, moving it forward in Japan. And so he travels around the world doing this, and then comes back and he's doing cuts in Washoe, and they're doing native songs out of the studio. So they're just taking native music, native beats, native culture, and just turning it into new genres and giving it a whole new voice.
I feel hopeful. You're giving me hope. Hopefully, the crust layer that I have of doubt and they're gonna keep killing us and all that. You're starting to chip away and melt it away. So I'm looking forward to that. But Brian, this is your platform, and you and I can just talk in circles. Like we just there's so much going on. But is there anything you want to add before I let you go actually do your job today?
No, just I what we're ending on here is just looking to the promise of our young people right now. To me, it's just so powerful and hopeful, and the tools that they're the adaptability that they're showing, and their way to make things fit in kind of a challenging environment and world is just it's inspiring, and I'm just full of hope. Over the last year, a lot of my work, as I went to the, one time I had to work with at UC Davis and work with like the faculty and talk to them and talk to them about this kind of stuff, what's going on with the summit and the tribes and whatnot. But my favorite part was going to the graduate and undergraduate classes and just seeing there's our future, right there, working at it right now, getting prepared, so, and that's not just there, it's all over the place, all over California. I know that the young people are working hard and staging this comeback for us. And so it's just a matter of us kind of giving them the tools and giving them the space to get out of their way and let it go. Because there's so much good energy and just positiveness and so much hope to me for the future. I have a very hopeful vision of the future and what's going on just based on what I'm seeing happening now, getting back into this space. And, I retired, I got out in 06 and then did some private stuff. But then over the last few years, I got back on this board, and now I'm like on the front line again, doing this work. And, I was retiring. I'm 67. Now I'm getting back into the fight again. And, we're hitting it hard, and I'm just full of energy and hope right now. And we've got a lot of plans, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And there's a strategic vision that we have that's actually producing results. And I've seen, the things that we've kind of charted out and working on happen already in this first year. So I'm full of hope and for the future and what we got to do. And it's only going to get better to me. I mean, we're good. I feel.
If you believe, I believe. I just got the goosebumps. If anybody's going to give me faith and hope, it's all the youth in your family. Like
I'm from good lands. We're connected.
It.
Yeah, good lands, good cultures, healthy places. I mean, look at the beauty that we're surrounded by where we live, and that we get to enjoy every day. And how can you not feel hope and power from that? So I'm just lucky to be here. I'm lucky. I feel so powerful. I'm lucky to be able to live on the lands that I come from and see all the families are still here.
I feel lucky to have you too. I feel like we're all lucky to have you. So now that you've filled us with so much hope and inspiration, how can the greater community, how can we support not just what you're trying to do, but this, how do we support this shift that we know is coming? Do we just throw money at Sierra Fund and let you handle it?
There's a lot of good ones. This Sierra Fund, certainly. Yeah, we need the help. This is what we're doing. We're putting it together for the summit and the voice of the summit and that the lands. But just support community-led language programs. Support. Do a lot of school. Get informed on indigenous food sovereignty, because it just hubs. It's such a hub for so many different directions. And kind of once you kind of get into that space, you start understanding, all the different work and the things that we need to do to create, land access, the things that we need to do for our more than human relatives, the reconnection you do with the places that you live and the things that you're walking around and stepping on in a way, or, are trying to give us power and wellness. You're just not connecting with it. So just enter into a relationship with your culture and your family and get out onto the land and start listening to the voice of the land and the music of the water and do everything you can just to support indigenous led conservation. It's happening up and down the state and around the West, and do a little education, find what's going on, but definitely do everything you can to support tribal efforts to get land and water back. That's for sure.
We all benefit from that. So if people want to contact you or have questions, to me, the easiest thing is the sierrafund.org and then our board, and you can contact you. Or do you have a specific email you want to give out, or just go to Sierra Fund and click on, easiest way to contact you is through that website?
Yeah, Sierra Fund, one word.org, or Brian.Wallace@sierrafund.org gets to me. So I'd love to hear from you. And, we're just trying to build a bigger family. So the more people we connect with, the bigger the family gets and the larger the effort and the richer the movement is. we'll be in a whole different place a year from now compared to where I thought we were a year ago, where we're at now. So it's going to be good.
Okay, I'm going to have you on in 1 year to the day,
Okay, you bet.
and you're going to tell me why it's better. And
It's going to be a different world for sure.
I believe. Brian Wallace, I don't want to hurt other people's feelings, but you're one of my favorite people ever.
Oh, same here. Thank you. We love you so much. I mean, everybody just loves squeezing on you, and we just so love seeing you with our family. And yeah.
So work on that. Work on that. Getting me married in. I'll come in through the second cousin angle or a twice removed. Like we got to work on. Also, with the work you're doing in the next year, I would like to be a Wallace.
Okay.
By the next year.
There's options for you, so we'll get together.
Oh, I love you guys so much. Tell Annie I wore her necklace today. Like you guys are just you roll around in my brain so much, and you guys have really shaped what I want to do when I grow up and the importance of these conversations. So I'm getting too emotional. Brian Wallace, Sierra Fund, thank you so much. And anytime you need a platform, you know I'm there.
I really appreciate this, and we will take advantage of it. And I just hope I was able to make sense and help. So thank you.
This is multifaceted. This is the start. This is kind of that threshold of people having permission to step into this change.
Oh, we'll do some work. I'm all over this. I'm definitely going to take advantage of this. So
I'm all over this, quote unquote.
Okay.
All right. Well, now that you're done working with me, you got to go get back to work and saving them Sierras.
Right. We got stuff we got to do.
All right. Well, I appreciate you. I love you. You're my favorite. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, love. Take care.
All right, buddy. Bye. And over the years, we try to get together and talk, but there's so many things to talk about. Or if we start, we're going to talk about waterways today. And then it ends up something totally different. It's especially on Native American Heritage Month, not to have somebody just carrying their heritage, but transforming it into a future. So I'm just serious, you guys. I'm going to be a Wallace. All right. Well, Chihole, I love y'all so hard. I appreciate you spending this red hoop talk with me. I'm wondering, like, should I do a quick clip? Yeah, let's do a little clip as we ride this out. So, we'll be back. Thanks for listening.
Everything back. Everything back. Everything back. Everything back. Everything back. Everything back.
It's a little video for some of our shirts. So I'm trying to find, because this is important too. We'll do this and then we'll wrap up the show, and I'm just still reeling.
Everything back.
Join the Everything Back movement and purchase a Cultural Sovereignty Protector shirt today. A Cultural Sovereignty Protector is an advocate who is working to create a world where diverse Native cultures and values are lived, protected, and respected. Cultural sovereignty means having control over those things that make us who we are as Native peoples. Everything Back is our movement to return those things that make us who we are so that we can heal. Purchasing one of our Native-designed limited edition shirts demonstrates your commitment to human rights and equality. Visit indian-affairs.org to check out all of the colors and styles in stock today.
Everything back.
Yay. All right. I got to exhale. I'm going to put that injection of hope and faith into my brain and my body. And it's interesting because I feel sometimes like we're staring at the Death Star and we're just little Jedis on a planet. I really don't want to end up like Alderaan. I don't. And I don't want to give into the dark side as my only option is survival and a good position in upper management. So thank you to all of the people, Indigenous and not Indigenous, banding together to kind of guarantee that no matter what happens politically, we're here and we're gonna see this through. So, all right. I will see you on the next Red Hoop Talk. And I just appreciate y'all being with me here today. And till next time, Chippies la chique.